I would just like to reassure anybody watching this that this is all about empathy and knowledge based on gathered experience and observation, and professional observation in a classroom. It doesn't mean in any way, shape or form it makes me an expert, but it does drive me to want to share the idea of anxiety with like-minded individuals, anybody going through it. We all feel at some point in our lives overwhelmed, and it gives way to a sense of not being in control, and being judged as a stressful individual turns the emphasis inwards, which sadly makes us feel powerless in the attempt to make any rational decisions, and perhaps most poignantly sometimes to feel that we're not being taken seriously. And the minute we give in to that feeling, it changes everything about us. I would love to think of myself as a person who thinks before reacting, but the reality is I'm not. My anxiety plays an enormous part of how I react to situations, and then I struggle to find the levity, I forget to laugh. As we said earlier, every generation has grown up with noise. We grew up with the revolutionary noise of emancipation, and this generation, the generation of today, has grown up with the noise of technology. And though they're very different, they both represent an attack on our senses, by which we constantly feel the need to measure ourselves by and measure others by. Today in the UK, I'm talking about a friend's personal experience now, but if her child isn't excelling, or she isn't doing the next cookery class or the next music club, there is this terrible feeling of not achieving. There is this measuring, my child's kid is doing this, my kid ought to be doing this, and there's this incredible pressure. And the minute we have that pressure, we put that pressure on ourselves, and that causes anxiety. And anxiety produces cortisol, and cortisol, as we know, is a stress drug, and it causes us to do all sorts of, it causes us to harbour weight, it precludes rational thought. And here's the killer: the more we think about it, the more it feeds off us. And I'm not here to tell anybody to get zen and take up yoga, though to be perfectly honest, I wish I'd have had more time to pursue that. I just feel incredibly passionate that we need to lift the lid off the so-called stigma and recognise that we all need to be a little bit kinder to ourselves, perhaps be a bit more simplistic in our expectations, and stop putting this terrible curse of self-imposed expectation on our children. They'll turn into regs, we'll turn into regs, and it doesn't make for a positive outcome. Anxiety is about that feeling, that pressure, that build-up of what might be. It isn't necessarily what is. And if it overtakes us and it consumes us to such a horrific degree, then we tend to want to resort to a pill that will fix us, instead of actually going inwards and going, okay, actually, if I do take a deep breath and I do stop, then maybe I can deal with it. We're not looking to provide a cure, because there is no cure, because you don't need fixing. You just need to recognise that anxiety has always been there, will always be there, will always be a part of life's reality, and don't pretend that anybody's life is without it. When you stop pretending, that's when things are achievable. I think when you are allowed to recognize stress and try to deal with that, then the frustration goes, the anger goes. And as we know, self-doubt leads to frustration, frustration leads to anger, anger leads to irrational thought, and this in turn leads us to make decisions that ordinarily, with time, space and breath, we simply may not take. I'm not here to wave any sort of magic wand to say that there is an absolute cure, but I suppose I just want to lift the lid off the feeling that we will never be without anxiety, but there are ways to deal with it. We don't have to become victims to our anxiety. My experience of anxiety, ongoing anxiety, is nowadays to face it head on and to try and find a solution. And that solution is not a one-stop shop. There are many, many ways that we can go about facing our potential fears. So there isn't a cure, but the essential is that we do recognize that there's always a solution to anxiety, and it isn't anybody else's version of it, it's your version of it. So there's, we're not here to say, face your fear, confront your anxiety, and then move on. No, because every single day you will face a different anxiety. I'm really grateful to Sophie for inviting me to talk about it, because anxiety is something that, if I'm very honest about, I have faced very, very often in my life. Even just talking to camera is something which is absolutely the most unnatural thing in the world for me. But I truly feel that when you are faced with a situation that causes you an enormous amount of stress, there has to be a solution, because what's the alternative? The alternative, and we've all been there, is to pull the duvet over our heads, to retract from society and to say, I'll deal with it another time. But our reality, if we're mums or teachers or wives or partners, is that we have to deal with it fairly expediently, otherwise we can't move on.